to this week's episode of the Marina Perry Podcast. I am so grateful that you've decided to tune in this week because I have an amazing guest. I have Kyra Yang, who is a certified hypnotherapist, and she works with 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs to design a winning CEO mindset and basically increase their revenue, increase their fulfillment. And even though we are going to be focused on that entrepreneur, I want those of you who are not yet in business or never intend to be in business to still tune in, because I feel that what she's going to share is going to impact any of us who are struggling to get to that next level or really create that life that is completely designed and in alignment with our best and our highest. So Kyra, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to dive into our juicy topic.
Thank you for having me, Marina. I'm really excited to be here. I really love your work, and I know a lot of our work has a lot of synergy and it aligns. So we're going to have a great conversation, no doubt.
I think it's going to be epic too. So first question that I always ask every guest is, if there was an animal that best represented your spirit, your energy, your way of being, what animal would that be and why?
The first thing that comes to mind, and it's always funny to me when it does, is a sloth.
You and my partner are the same. He is the sloth. So tell me why.
I think they're just very slow and grounded and intentional, but very sweet. But something about the way that they have a very lackadaisical way of being, but owning it, it resonates. I don't know what it is about it, but I just love it.
It is, you're right when you say they own it. They don't feel rushed by the world, do they? It's almost like as we want them to rush, they just go slower. And one of my favorite scenes from, I don't know if you've ever seen Zootopia, when the sloth goes into the transport department and that communication thread, and they're just waiting for them to speed up, and they just,
I remember that.
So much, and it reminds me of daily life with my partner. So which superpower, if you could have one, would you choose to pick?
Superpower, probably teleportation. To be anywhere in the world with anyone I would love to be with. A lot of my very close friends that I have acquired over the years in, becoming a hypnotherapist and being in the coaching world and the personal development world, and even my clients, they're all over the world. So if I could be with those, soul clients, soul family members, and just friends, that would be an amazing thing. And also just, I love traveling.
Yeah. Well, it would speed it up for sure. I agree. Being able to just like bam, bam, anywhere at any time, that'd be amazing. All right, so let's dive in, because we're going to talk about emotional intelligence today and how, well, you're going to share with us, I guess, how this is the key. This is the missing link for people to really experience success and abundance at that whole next level. So before we, unpack what emotional intelligence is, can you share with us a bit of your story of how you came to do this work, how you came to be a hypnotherapist, and why specifically you work with, such high performance entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I was, living life in the classic 9 to 5. I, quote unquote, had the perfect life, lots of benefits, high paying salary. I was married. I had 2 cute little dogs. I had great friends, but I always felt as though something was missing. I just felt like this cannot be it. This can't be the rest of my life. In theory, I have everything, but I don't feel that happy. And I was deeply insecure. And I always felt as though, nothing was ever really that great, right? So I actually jumped into entrepreneurship in 2020 into my first business, which is a fitness studio. I still have it today, but we actually ended up going into COVID, like lockdown for 17 months. And it was like my whole life savings, like everything that I possibly could have ever had into this one thing. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
And well, I just have to pause your story right there. I don't want to interject for too long, but yeah. I just want to mirror to you, I guess, a deep empathy, because firstly, what an initiation into entrepreneurship that would have been. As someone who had a health club that was 20 years old when we went into COVID, I still know what that took from me. So I cannot imagine, but I'm sure that it accelerated your learning curve and your growth and your expansion to have just started it pre-COVID. I mean, that must have been rough, babe.
Yeah, it was. And I was just like, okay, well, I have all this free time. And, I started doing these like meditations online, and I didn't realize they were self-hypnosis, right? I had no understanding about personal development. I didn't have a sense of self or an identity. And I started doing these meditations, quote unquote. And then I started to feel really good. And then things started to like happen in my life. And I was just like, this cannot be coincidence. And then, fell into the world of manifestation, and then I started to realize there was something so much bigger. And then I had a friend who was a life coach. And in my mind, I was like, oh, like part of me really wants to be a life coach, but like, I don't want to be a life coach. It's so weird. And then she was like, I actually see a hypnotherapist. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a job. And right in that moment, I knew right away, it was like an instantaneous knowing, like, this is what I was meant to do my whole life. So I got certified, I dove right in, I opened a business like a month later, and it just kind of took off from there. So that's how I got into it. What I started to notice as I was moving through entrepreneurship, though, was that a lot of the people I was in containers with, in coaching containers, people I was working with, people were just having a lot of stress, anxiety, self-doubt. Nobody felt good, and even if they were creating new levels of success, they were still feeling in a very low quality of life. And I was like, something is amiss. And then I started connecting with people who, started to reach out to me regarding money mindset. I guess like, through other clients, people had great experiences. And I was like, I don't see myself as that coach, but okay, like, let's go ahead and do the work. They started getting great results. And then it started to involve in, higher level individuals who were already generating like way more success than me, right? Like have generated like already their 7 figures or $20 million or, even bigger numbers. But they were still unhappy. And, the biggest moment of realization for me was when I had one of my, longest standing clients, she's still with me today, come to me with a 7-figure business. And she was like, I feel like I'm just about to give up. Like, just, I'm done. I don't know that I can do this anymore. This is kind of like, I'm here with you, and this is like my last chance. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, we got to make this happen for you if you really want to make it happen. And so I was recognizing that, the emotional intelligence, the mindset component was so crucial for entrepreneurs to actually sustain this level of success and continue to break into more. Because, if you think you're stressed now with whatever level of success you have, the pressures, the responsibilities are only going to get greater. And really, when we are unable to manage that, it's really a deficiency and not really like, I don't want to say like there's something to fix, but there is something that is amiss in our mindset in the deeper subconscious. So that's how it came to be.
Yes, amazing. And it's interesting, I feel like it's almost, like a Disney script, this whole people who have success and then are not, and then are miserable. Like it's just this thing that we seem to subscribe to. And yet it seems very like true and apparent, right? And so, why do you think that is? Like, why do you, and we're talking a little bit about entrepreneurship, and I would say that what you're sharing seems to be true for a lot of people. A lot of people are building their dream, they're creating something that just comes and lights their heart up, and they're thinking, well, I'll work for myself, I'll be free, all of these things. And yet entrepreneurship as a journey for many people is more stressful, is less abundant. Like a lot of people, I mean, as we know, the statistics prove this with the number of businesses that fail, and the burnout and the bankruptcies and all of these things. So I guess it's two-part, but on a bigger level, maybe entrepreneurship aside, why are people, when they're achieving this level of success, in your experience, why are they not happy?
Yeah. So I always say, more success, you get, more income, more wealth than you've ever thought possible before. You've reached the next milestone. But the reality is that you just have more success and you have more money, but you're still the exact same person, right? They say money doesn't change you, it just amplifies you. And especially when you have, if you have a perfectionism cycle or a scarcity loop running, the pressure to sustain that level of success that is self-created is so high. Like, you set the bar impossibly high that it is really hard to continue to sustain that. And you constantly are worrying, will I be able to keep it up? Was this a fluke? Am I an imposter? Was this a one-hit wonder? Like, even people who have generated like over 10 million plus, right? They are still thinking these thoughts. And those individuals are in rooms with other individuals who have generated even 9, 10 figures, still having this very exact conversation, right? So when we are unable to look at the deeper subconscious root cause of why this self-created pressure, these self-imposed limits are being created, the pressure becomes so insurmountable that our bodies are too stressed out. Like it's too much stress. We're either like working ourselves into the ground, trying to sustain it. There's too much anxiety and overwhelm where we're always in fear that we might lose it. Right. So that's a really hard stance if your outlook is always like, how do I, sustain to not lose versus like sustain to win?
Mm-hmm. And so emotional intelligence, what does that mean to you? And why do you think it's the key?
So emotional intelligence to me, I find when we think about emotional decision making, and it doesn't mean that emotions are bad. We're human. We're meant to experience them, the full spectrum, right? But when we have emotional decision making in our business, it really can be the deficiency of one's business, because when your emotions are in the show, like running the show, when things are great, that's great. Right. But when you're having a bad sales month, when, your launch didn't go well, when you didn't get the funding that you thought you were going to get, and, or your fulfillment isn't happening with your suppliers, whatever it might be, and vendors, when it's all going sideways, where are you at, right? Are you a wreck? Are you in like analysis paralysis, or even in procrastination because you're so overwhelmed and paralyzed by the anxiety? Right? Or are you unable to make decisions with large sums of money, right? Are you afraid to invest? Are you like whatever it is that you need to be doing? If your emotions, especially negative states, because if you think about negative states, it's the only reason you don't get out of bed, right? It's the only thing that will keep you from doing anything when you are hungover or when you are in heartbreak. Like you don't want to do anything, right? So when you are in negative states, it's harder for us to progress and consistently build momentum and take action within our business. When we can mitigate negative states, then we're in neutrality. So when we think about emotional intelligence, we want to think about being in neutral states, whether it's regarding decision-making, whether it's regarding communications with your organization, team members, clients, whether that's, with money, right? There's a lot of negative emotions that surround money, even though we want more of it, right? So when we can find neutrality in all areas of our life and make very clear decisions, right? Any decision made in anxiety is never going to be as good as one made in very calm, clear states, then we are in the best position to make the best decision for our businesses to move ourselves forward.
So then is emotional intelligence, I guess you're saying we want to not be, I mean, and I know that I guess the higher the emotional state, the lower the behavioral flexibility is how we would say it, right? Like we go into fight or flight and our system contracts and we're not thinking quote unquote straight because the prefrontal cortex is shut down. And so you're acting like an animal, literally. And I guess I'm asking, is emotional intelligence then maybe twofold? First of all, is there a part we have to recognize that you're in that state? Because sometimes it's just what we're going to just do that the thing's going to kick up, whether that's procrastination or whether that's running a mile a minute and making bad decisions. But is some kind of, I guess, development or enhancement and gaining of emotional intelligence, first of all, noticing it. And then I guess my question is, and then what? Like, what are the steps to, if someone's listening, it's like, well, yeah, I feel like that. I feel like I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I don't want to do anything, et cetera, et cetera. So what do I do? Like, what are your tips to actually step into neutrality?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all is, as you brought to the table already, is just awareness, right? We have to know that we are having some sort of emotional response, and it's usually involuntary. So if you feel triggered naturally, afraid that, somebody thinks your ideas aren't good, like I have entrepreneurs and founders that have generated, over 7 figures, still questioning if their ideas are good, right? They don't trust themselves. If you are still feeling overwhelmed by making decisions regarding big expansions for your business, right? you have to bring the problem into awareness, quote unquote problem, and the knee-jerk reaction, because this is involuntary, it's subconscious, it's something that is connected to something much deeper, which we're going to get to, right? So first we just have to notice that we're like, oh, why did I automatically feel scared or fearful or guilty right away based on what they said or based on me doing or not doing this activity? The second thing is then observation, right? So we need to like look at like, okay, so that triggered me, right? That made me feel not so great, fearful, whatever emotion, and really get clear on what the specific emotion is. And then begin to practice non-judgmental awareness, right? Because we start to then identify with that story. And, because again, it's subconscious, something that you probably have been doing for the last 20, 30, 40 years of your life, right? And it's just a program, whether it's around money, whether it's around success, whether it's around failure, whether it's around perfectionism, whether it's around visibility. There's all kinds of ways that this can show up. And so when we can start to observe, the biggest thing that is, the key here is when we can create space between the thought, which is rooted in a belief, and the actual knee-jerk reaction, right? That's the moment that if we can create like a sliver of space, that space can actually become larger. And then there's actually going to be more space between like, okay, I observed that trigger in my reality, right? In my business, with my coworker, with this investment, with this decision, with this email, with this client. And I have a moment to think about it. Like, okay, does this actually make me feel that negative state, or can I experience something new, right? So once we move into observation, now we have to get to the root. Really, what am I making this mean about me? Anytime that we feel negatively, it's something, this is actually why I connected with you, Marina. You had a great episode on parts. There's a part of us that we've repressed, part of us that we've rejected because we were shown shame or guilt for that, right? And so when we can get clear on the root of what it is that is creating this involuntary subconscious trigger, then that's where the work comes in, whether it's with NLP or hypnosis or some sort of neuroscience technique. I also like to use timeline therapy techniques. Then we got to change the root cause, right? The root programming, rewire that for you so that we can just kind of release the charge for you and disconnect the original thought from the emotion. And then we start building new neural pathways to achieve more neutrality. And you'll start to notice that in your everyday life, those old triggers don't make you feel so bad anymore. And when you're not feeling again in bad states, or when you're not, as humans, we want to move away from pain. We want to move away from bad states. That's just naturally how we run. Then we're going to move towards something that we really want, right? So those are kind of the 4 steps that, really allow you to evolve and learn how to get into a state of neutrality.
Okay. So just again, for the listener, and even, I loved what you shared, but the 4 states are: 1, awareness, like noticing that you're triggered. 2 was that creating the space to
Observation.
Observation. And then 3 is kind of get to the root cause. So what am I making this mean? When did I decide this? What's the reaction and why? And then 4 is we rewire that, and then 4 is like new neural pathways, like surviving essentially that which previously felt unsurvivable.
Yeah, and actually changing that survival into just neutral, right? It's no longer the knee-jerk response. And again, through neuroscience techniques, you can make that change and rewiring very fast, happen very quickly for you. And then it's just practicing those reps in the real world. That's number 4, right? It's integration. So those old triggers are going to come into your world and they just really won't bother you anymore, which is why many of my clients, I'm sure with yours as well, they start to feel massive reductions in anxiety and overwhelm in just the first 4 to 6 weeks alone, right? So when we can get into a higher baseline state by removing negative states that are being inundated by your everyday life, you're definitely already going to feel a positive shift for yourself, just bottom line.
Yeah. So, I mean, the key, I guess the transition, or the most important gap, transitioner there from what you want to what you're experiencing to what you want, is this bringing the unconscious into the conscious. And yet I feel like we're like, oh yeah, well, just noticing the thing. And I just want to speak into, because I think it's not spoken into enough, that because it's so automatic for us and it's so the way we do, that can actually be harder than people think. And by that, I mean, this is the benefit of having coaches or going into, you were sharing about going into containers and people with different levels of success. And then, this is where people say, oh, comparison is just terrible. We need to stop comparing. And yet often it's through that relativity that we go, it doesn't have to be like this. For instance, if I share personally, to give some context, I used to think that I did life the way I did life. And then my partner would be like, you're like a mile a minute. You've got so much on in your day. And I'd be like, no, I don't. This is really chill. I'm not stressed at all. And I didn't feel stressed. Like if you had asked me, are you stressed, Marina? I'd be like, no, I'm busy, but I'm not stressed. I can handle it. Because I had just pushed the accelerator to the level that it's like, that was the normal, like you said, the baseline was 100 miles an hour. And it took him kind of saying, and I was very resistant. I was like, don't tell me how to do life, slothy, you just too slow. You just got nothing going on, all the things. And yet in watching how he did life, it was like, well, I am definitely faster and I'm doing a lot more. And I guess my point is there that if even before that, like maybe the thing, if you don't recognize the behavior or the experience as potentially being a coded response, then just simply going, am I getting the result I want? Like, would you say that? Like, am I having, and by result, I mean, am I feeling the way I want to feel? Because much like you, I had quote unquote success in the world. And yet to be honest, I probably never even dropped into how I felt. Like I didn't even think about how I felt because I was just so busy doing. But I'm thinking for the listener, a reason to reach out to a coach like Kyra or to go and have this kind of work done, you may not even be super clear on the trigger, but if you're clear that you're not having the felt experience or experiencing the results you want, then that in itself is a sign. Would you say that? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The bigger thing is really about the long-term sustainability, right? In the early stages of entrepreneurship, you are running on so much adrenaline and getting to the success and, discovering this new aspect of life. But after a while, if you're constantly feeling anxious or you're always overwhelmed, you're stressing about money 24/7, no matter how much comes in. You're really self-critical because you never feel like anything is good enough. Like I have clients who deliver great projects, but after still overthink and overanalyze about how it could have been better. And, did they really deserve the money, right? The unworthiness factor, right? All of this leads to procrastination and, suboptimal decision-making. And really, like as an entrepreneur, your number one job is problem solving and, making decisions, right? So when you are inundated with all of these negative states, whether they are really, really loud, or they're always just running in the background, this will have an impact on your emotional state, which again, when you are having a negative quote unquote experience, it drains you, right? And your energy is what you have to execute and create output into this world, right? And your execution is momentum into real world results. So when we can get rid of the trash, then we're naturally going to improve your baseline. And that will then, open up your mind to have the possibility to access more innovation, more problem solving, more clarity, more just fulfillment, finding passion again for what you do, because you're not bogged down by feeling like crap all the time. And you just will have more energy, right? So there's a lot that you can access that will increase and enhance your performance as an entrepreneur, and also as a natural byproduct, have a greater quality of life, perform better in your business, and achieve next level results. So
yeah, and I love that you mentioned energy, because I think that's the key to it all, right? And that's the biggest even symptom or sign that things aren't how or they could be, and I really focus on energy both physically and mentally and energetically, like in our field. But I wanted to, it popped up in my mind before, so I'm going to ask the question.
Yeah.
For someone listening who's like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to be emotional and I want to be neutral. But then, especially, I guess, maybe in the space that you and I operate in, there's this whole language around being lit up and being passionate and being called to it and feeling excited. And that's the sign, like follow that energy. That I have a sense that some people associate neutral as like flat, if that makes sense. And so I'm just curious, how do you respond to that if someone's like, well, I like feeling emotionally engaged and activated, because neutral to me just feels like I don't give a shit. Like, why do I want
Yes.
to speak neutral? Like, what would you say to that thought process?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I have a client who is, big in finance, and she was like, well, if I am not emotional, then I feel like, exactly as you said, like, it seems like I don't give a shit and I'm dealing with multi-millions of dollars every single day. I have to give a shit. And I was like, not a true story, but we can dive in. So the biggest difference I find here is that when you have EQ, right, emotional intelligence, and we talked a little bit about energy, and we'll just tie this all together, is that this is all a downstream of your belief system, right? What you believe in your brain. Because if you believe that you are good enough, if you believe that you are worthy of having, X dollar client or X brand expansion, like if you truly believe that about yourself, whatever you believe and you feel confident about, it's, you're going to go after it, right? So when you have more positive thoughts or a positive belief system that then results in positive thoughts that release, positive emotions, greater confidence, and we move forward, that's naturally going to increase your energy, right? So when we are in, again, those suboptimal negative, quote unquote, negative states, we're more naturally drained. We don't have as much energy to go, number one, even find opportunities, let alone we're just surviving and barely executing, or we're executing, but just kind of doing to do, right? And so when we think about, the neutrality, it's that you are no longer in this knee-jerk reaction, right? Like you're not like, oh my gosh, this one comment now sent me into a huge anxiety spiral, this thing that this client said, negative feedback, right? And then you're like out for the day, or something didn't go perfectly in your day. And then you just are like, I'm just going to throw in the towel, start again tomorrow, right? You feel almost as though you are not in control. Okay. Or you have to convince yourself to be in like really high vibrational states and, or else you're doing it wrong. Okay. Like these are not the states where it feels almost like a force. Okay. And sometimes like we got to like, edge ourselves into like more positive states. Sure. Right. But it's not this like drastic push to make it happen in the positive side. And on the negative side, it's like this, involuntary response where we're like almost feeling out of control. Like, how did that happen? I'm already in this like spiral again, in the dumps of the dumps, right? When we are in neutrality, we have empowerment and choice. Okay. So you can choose because you had an amazing month to feel super excited, but the outside validation doesn't send you skyrocketing, right? You're not just like, oh my God, like this is the best thing ever. And it can be the best thing ever, but you get to choose to feel excited about it, not because your results mean something about you, but because you're like, hey, I did that. That's awesome, right? And like you said, being present with what you just did. And on the flip side, when we are feeling, something didn't go right, or, it went sideways, or we had a low month, or that, we failed, right? Failure is so inevitable. It's just part of the process. We also don't let that take us out, right? Because we can look at it from a very clear standpoint, like kind of like emotions aside. We can say, hey, like that failure doesn't mean that I am not going to make it, or I'm not good enough, or it's never going to happen for me. It just didn't work. Let me look at the data and actually gather some learnings here, because I have new gold and data to take with me to move myself forward, right? So when we can, really like look at it as like a no big deal mentality, because when we can again separate ourselves from the money and the success, or the failures and the rejections, then we can be really clear and calm about, what we can move forward on for ourselves, but also like not make it mean something about us where we're like an emotional roller coaster and feeling as though we have no control. Because again, like that state is not sustainable for any entrepreneur. If you're doing that, and if you feel like you're doing this now, again, at greater levels of success, when you're dealing with more money, more success, more visibility, the pressure is even bigger. So you need to be able to manage yourself and almost create a separation.
And even as I'm listening to you, it's because we build our world with our words, and language is very individually interpreted. And so neutral can just feel flat for people. And yet, through the filter, I guess, of my somatic training, what I'm really hearing you say is that neutral could be synonymous with, say, like regulated. You're coming back into regulation. And when you're regulated, you can be resourced. And as you were saying, instead of reacting, now we can respond. because we're actually, centered and stable. And it's like life doesn't rock us. Yeah. So I love that. I love that. And thank you for unpacking a little more, because I just think there would be people out there that's like, no, I don't want to feel neutral. I want to feel all the things. So,
and just to add to your point is that it's the greatest, I would say, like the closest thing that you can feel to being in total control of yourself and your future, right? And it is the emotional regulation that stems from EQ.
yeah, I love that. And so, you're mentioning that everything comes from beliefs, and I completely agree with you. Like, what's that saying? If we believe we can and we believe we can't, we're right. Like, we're such, I laugh that we teach manifesting, and I understand, but we're all manifesting all the time, perfectly and in complete coherence and alignment with our beliefs. So, and this is why I'm such an advocate for the inner work, and why, if life isn't showing up, if you're listening to this and you're like, I just can't seem to get there, it's not possible for me. It is possible for you. There's just, as Kyra is sharing here, there's a block, there's a belief, and you're just adhering to it. That's what we do. We adhere to our own beliefs. And so I know that you're very big on the mindset traps of high performers. Like, you have, a beautiful freebie on your website, and we'll link to all of those sites where people can download the 7 and you unpack it. But you don't have to share the whole 7, but earlier you mentioned perfectionism, and you also mentioned like a scarcity loop. And so, like, what are the things that we're collectively all doing on some level, or mostly, that are just really like trapping us, caging us in, and preventing us from reaching that next level of performance?
Yeah. One of the things that I find it will never die is the imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about this, because I love this. I mean, I certify coaches. And so this is something that comes up all the time. Like, and just, for anyone listening, it's like, who's like, what's the imposter syndrome? And I think most people know these days, but who am I to do this thing? Who am I to be this person, to speak on this, to be, big in that way? But yes, please tell us more about this nasty little thing.
Yes. So imposter syndrome is exactly that. Who am I to? I could never be that person. I'm not as good as this, whoever you idolize or have on the pedestal, all of these ideas. And I love this topic because whether you're starting out early on in the journey of entrepreneurship, and again, whether you've generated over 20, even like $100 million, entrepreneurs I've talked to still experience this, okay? And imposter syndrome actually, to me, is a very positive sign of growth. The side that we are most familiar with is the self-doubt, right? Like, who am I to, right? And a lot of this stems from feeling unworthy, right? We feel that we are not good enough, that we are not worthy enough to be paid that much, to be credited that much, to be seen in that way, to be talking to X individuals in bigger opportunities and bigger rooms. Like, we feel like we're not there yet. Like, we have to be smaller than that opportunity, right? And the thing is that when we actually look at imposter syndrome, it's a beautiful sign of growth, because we are going somewhere we haven't been before, right? Of course, it's going to feel scary. Anything new always feels scary. And we're actually reaching out for something that is just outside, or maybe even 3 steps outside of where we want to be. And the bigger the gap, the bigger the imposter syndrome starts to feel, right? So like, whether you're increasing your prices 2-3 times, like whatever it might be, or walking into rooms where people are, have generated like, a lot more money than you are like, famous or whatever it might be. They're just people too. Okay. But when we can start to, really put down the stories around who am I to, it's like, well, who aren't you to? Who is creating these stories about why you can't, right? And generally, it's always learned, as we know from our belief systems, it's either us telling ourselves, oh, we can't. Well, if I'm telling myself that, I obviously learned that from somewhere, right? Usually from childhood, where you're maybe, second best, or the other sibling, or you're always being compared. You might have been like in very highly competitive sports. You might have been, always like going for A's and winning gold and all of those things, right? There's a lot of pressure to be a certain way. So you start to doubt yourself, and the good thing is that, when we start to reframe imposter syndrome as, oh, wow, I'm moving towards an even bigger goal, of course, it's going to feel uncomfortable because I haven't been there before, but that doesn't mean that I can't do it, right? Most people mistake discomfort as inability, right? But those two things are very different. So understanding, oh, I haven't done this before. Oh, everyone feels this way. And the biggest thing that I take away from the, multimillionaires that I've worked with and know, they always say, Kyra, we are all making it up.
And so I want to, before we go into other like mindset, I want to just go a little bit deeper on this, because this is just, I can't even tell you how alive this is in my space in particular, and even for myself, I'll be honest, like,
All experience.
I've generated tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, through ideas that have come out of my head over the years, right? And then when I move into a new space, I'm like, oh, well, who am I to comment on that? Like, no one wants to hear. And I hear all those voices. And even though I know what you're saying, and I love that reframe, well, of course, you're going to think like that. I guess the question I wanted to ask is, in this day and age, we have this real narrative around being, it's about being the beingness, right? Like if you're authentically owning the thing, then you're going to attract your crowd. Like I'm speaking specifically, I guess, in the space of, this is very big in the coaching space because I work and you do with coaches. So we'll just go there for the moment. But if you're selling anything in life, you've got to, there's an energy of like, I've got to really feel authentically in belief around it. Like you can sell something as an amazing product if you've ever been in sales when you believe the product is amazing. That's my experience. Maybe some people can sell it when they don't, but I think it's easier to sell it, right, when you really believe in it. So the question I have about imposter syndrome, I agree with you. Everyone walking the planet has it. So all the people you put on pedestals, they're sitting there looking at other people who they're put on pedestals. Like it's a collective, it's part of the human experience. And I guess the question is, we can reframe it. And I love that. So if I'm feeling like there's this thing I'm stretching into, no wonder I feel this way and these thoughts come up because I'm stretching into it. And then I'm curious about, how do we sit in that place of knowing, well, I'm stretching into it, and yet I need to be in the embodiment of it, apparently, to call in. And like, I feel like that almost, that narrative almost kind of, what's the word I'm trying to say, isn't supportive of allowing us to be in that budding phase and still calling people in the awareness that we're maybe moving into it. What's your take on that, or any thoughts on that? I don't know that I formulated that question super clearly, but I think you're picking up what I put down. Yeah.
I think I'm picking it up. So, when it comes to what we talked about earlier, a lot of people are in awareness. Yes, we can know the reframes. We can know that we have this problem, or, this like mindset block that's coming up. And the truth is, the fastest way to move through it is through subconscious work, right? Because it's 95% of our brain, right? I often laugh to myself sometimes, like, why aren't we optimizing the 95% of our brain? We would never take a strategy and only implement 5%. Like, that would be like the craziest thing. And when we can actually look at the 95% of our mind that actually houses our identity, and which is our self-perception, how we see ourselves, right? When we can start to shape that to be in alignment with where you are going, right? That's when we have less of that incongruency, that fighting that happens between, oh, well, that's not me, but I feel it, like that kind of like back and forth monkey brain. And, we can start to perceive ourselves as that future self. Okay. When we do that in hypnosis, again, we're changing and rewiring the way the 95% of your brain works, and your self-perception, how you see yourself, is the most important part. So if you already see yourself as the multi-million-dollar coach, if you already see yourself as the speaker, it's going to be a lot easier for you to have higher levels of, again, confidence, because your emotional energy connected to the belief is going to be a bit stronger. And then that confidence is going to allow you to take more steps, right? And with anything new, again, as we crush imposter syndrome, we just got to get our reps in that new identity. And we know that, it's kind of the two different sayings of, I'll believe it when I see it. Right. So we're like hoping, we're like, oh, like, I'll wait for the validation. I'll wait for the clients. I'll wait for the success. And because our brains want to know that it's safe to move forward. Our brains want evidence, right? It's a supercomputer. It's super, super smart. And it's trying to keep you safe. So of course, it's not going to lead you into danger, into rejection and failure and all the things that like make us feel pain and terrible inside. But when we can move away from that and start to shift into more positive feelings that are conducive towards making those everyday habits, right? And focusing on what is it that I can do today, right? Our habits in our everyday life are what builds momentum to getting to our next level, right? So it's really focusing away from the end goal of why aren't I there yet, right? Into, okay, what is it that I can do today that makes me feel confident, that I know that I can get my reps in, because our everyday habits will then build to the next level momentum, right? This is how it works.
So I feel really called to ask you specifically around hypnosis, because I'm familiar with, how the brain.
Can I just finish one more thing?
Yes.
I went off on a tangent and then I was like, I forgot. And I was like, okay, the loop came around. What I was saying was, I'll believe it when I see it because we want evidence, but we have to be it and then I'll see it. That's the second, right?
It's kind of that whole thing, right? Of we often think I need to get confidence to do the thing, but in doing the thing, we have the confidence. So, I agree with you. I mean, this is why I'm super pro the inner work. And I want to talk about what hypnosis is, just for people who don't really understand. And any neural or subconscious reprogramming. And I think sometimes there's an element of, those people who are, or I think it's like Mel Robbins or whatever. It's like 3, 2, 1, do the thing. Like sometimes it is like once you've done it, there your brain goes, oh, I'm not dead. There's evidence. Oh, program updated. Do you know what I mean? So it's a combination of the either or. But let's talk about hypnosis for a second, because I have a sense that some people listening, and I say this because this was me before I really knew what hypnosis was. Maybe previous versions of Marina had this thought. That someone's going to go into my brain and like rejig things, and that feels really unsafe. And what if I don't like what they're programming? Like there's this thought that someone like a puppeteer, if they're a hypnotherapist, is going, I guess also, let's be honest, because we have stage performance hypnosis where people are doing, quacking like ducks and doing the things. And it's like, they don't know that they're doing it. So can you just unpack for someone, or for everyone listening, when you do hypnosis on a 7 and 8 figure high performer who's got a block around visibility or stepping into that next level, like, what does that actually look like? What do you do?
So basically what we initially do is we just map out the blocks, right? Like what are the current blocks, whether they are around money, whether they are around visibility, as you said, whether it's around the fear of success, especially at this level, because there's a sustainability issue, right? Like the impending pressure and responsibility of their decision now ripple effects beyond just them now, right? So there's an immense amount of pressure to not basically screw it up or not lose it all. And they want to sustain the life that they have, right? It's a very, again, self-created pressure. And sometimes that feels it's insurmountable. So when we think about, looking at the subconscious work, we just map out what the blocks are, right? And whether they are core blocks from childhood, because most of our programming is designed from ages of 0 to 7, what we learn about money, love, success, everything that you have in your life today. And we also look at upper limit blocks, right? Typically around money, next level visibility and success. And when we can, and those are like, I would say like current roadblocks that create a glass ceiling. We map those out. Then we start to look at the easiest way that I explain hypnosis is, yes, it's rooted in science. We work at neuroplasticity, rewiring your brain. That's not English. We look at reframing those negative states where you learned about, rejection, or you learned about failure, those painful times, or, for example, if it's about love, like heartbreak, right? Or a time that you were ridiculed and you were seen in a certain way, whatever it might have been. We look at changing the emotional charge from pain to neutral or pleasure, right? So normally when we feel stuck in life, it doesn't matter if it's in entrepreneurship, it could be anywhere. It's because we're remembering something of our past, right? We're stuck in our past. And so when we can alleviate the pain then there is actually no more problem. There's no more stuckness. And so when we can reframe pain to pleasure or pain to neutrality, then you have actually freedom of choice to choose something new for your life. And so, what that really looks like in session is we have some conversation. The questions are posed to get your mind to think in new ways. When we're actually in hypnosis, it will just feel like a meditation. You could get up and leave. I'm, not in control of your mind. I am not, a master puppeteer. And you're only actually going to accept suggestions that are in alignment with your true desires, right? You're only really going to do what you really want to do. We're just going to help promote you to first get rid of what isn't serving you, what's keeping you stuck, what's keeping you feeling as though you cannot move forward, or you're procrastinating or in self-sabotaging behaviors. And then also push you in a direction that is going to promote the future you of all the things that you do want to do, right? And then promoting very positive associations with, making decisions, signing the big contracts, asking for the next price increase, whatever it might be for you. And so when you, again, see yourself in that light, if you were to see yourself already, doing the next level decision, whether that's a new price point, a new type of client, a new brand expansion, or a new launch, right? If you feel very positive about that, you're more likely to move forward. So we want to promote you to move in that direction. So that's kind of the easiest way I can explain it. Reframe pain and pleasure so that you no longer feel stuck by the fear, so that you actually take action to move yourself forward.
And I don't know about you, but I also use timeline therapy in a lot of different modalities.
Oh, life-changing.
But yeah, I feel like sometimes people who are new to the inner work, right, or new to that kind of thing, feel like if there's a block, there must be something really bad. Something's broken in there, and I don't want someone to see all the ways I'm broken, and yet I'll just deal with the ways it's not functioning well in my life right now. And yet I think it's helpful for people to understand that what we did in that youthful stage, and I don't know if you found this to be true as well, but it's like our system didn't factor in context with that content, and then it blankets it. So often when we go back, to the time or the when you made the meaning and decided that behavior was how you needed to behave, there's often this thought that what if I go back and I get some horrible memory and there's a repressed trauma I don't know about. And not to minimize things, that does happen, of course. The brain is very powerful at protecting us. And yet sometimes it can be the most, even a beautiful memory, or a memory. And then you realize it's the meaning you made in that moment that you contextually just smeared across as a behavioral reflex. And then with the value and the benefit of the adult mind viewing the perspective, you go, I can see that doesn't serve me in every context now. But at the time, that's simply what I did. And it wasn't out of failure or shortcomings. It was just the thing I decided that seemed most protective in the moment. And even in doing that, there's this depolarization against yourself, because you go, that was the best I had at the time. It worked in the moment in the ways that it did and failed in the ways that it failed. But, if I continue to perpetuate it, which is unconsciously what we're doing, which is why you're saying, go and look at this unconscious, not because you're flawed, but because the mapping or the contextualization really just needs an update. And as soon as you update it, as you say, it's like that. That's what people miss about this. It's like, as soon as you update it, the system goes, it's safe to do that now. Of course you can do it differently, because now we get it. We see the bigger picture kind of thing. And so, I just really, if you're listening and you're really struggling, look into these modalities, reach out to Kyra, because it seems like it feels scary to do it, but it's actually the easier way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's the easier way to have the shift than continuing to fight yourself and wonder why it's not happening.
We just get to the root. And as you said, we just have to unlearn and then choose to learn something new that is very productive for you. I think of, so many instances of my childhood where, somebody called me ugly on the playground when I was 4. And until I was about 29, I believed I was ugly. right? And it was like a very small moment in time, but it framed the way that I thought of myself, and ultimately, the level of confidence I had in all areas of my life to go after promotions or to go on the dates. Like I held myself back, right? So there's, these little things that have really monumental effects on our daily lives that we may not even notice because we think it's just the way that it's always been and the way that it always will be. But that simply isn't true. If there's something in your life you don't like, it's probably unconscious, where we can promote a way better self-perception that will allow you to, break free and unlock like a new level of success and happiness for yourself. And to our conversation a little bit earlier about money too, it's like for the longest time I thought I was like, if I ever made $100,000, I would be like winning the lottery, right? And that's a great salary too. But as a base, I was like, oh, that would be everything. And in my first year of coaching alone, like I made more than that. But for the longest time, even during the 9 to 5s, I never even applied to anything close to 100. I always do like 85, 90, because I had an upper limit about what I believed I was capable of producing. So we just don't even, we like keep ourselves small.
Let's dive into that.
Yeah.
Let's dive into the money particularly, because I know you actually have a phrase, and I'd love to hear what mindset currency. I'm curious what that means, and I don't know if it relates to this, or if it doesn't. Unpack that first. But is this the lack? You said loops of lack or cycles of lack. Is this what this is, or is it a ceiling, or what is it that is? And I've worked with clients who literally can't earn more than their parents have ever earned. Like they just don't exceed it, as you said. And yet there are people, it's like, woof, they're just more money coming in. And those people are no different in their skill set, no different in their charisma. Like there's no real difference, except one is allowing a shit ton more money to land in their bank account, and the other is seemingly keeping it at bay. So yeah, can you speak to these ceilings of income, this lack or scarcity, and whether that relates to this mindset currency, or if I've just fused your terminology in there because it's had currency?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things we could talk about here. So money is a great topic because we all want more of it. We all love it. But we also all, a part of us may not actually want it. And this is what we're going to get into. So mindset currency for me is, it's really the whole spectrum of emotional intelligence, right? And one of those components is abundance. And the more mindset currency you have, right? As I said, like the more we can minimize all of those negative states, the ones that I say like really are putting your business at risk, the burnout, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the money stress, the negative thought patterns, the low self-confidence, like all of those things, the procrastination. When we can get rid of that, we're automatically going to increase our baseline state for performance, which is mindset currency, right? That's the adaptability, the resilience, the optimism, the positivity, because all wealth is generated in your mind first, right? You have to have the idea, you have to have the genius come through. And those states, right, are only more conducive to happen, innovative problem solving, all of the things, solutions, when we minimize the negative states, right? So mindset currency is the idea of generating mental wealth that is meant to be in tandem, used with strategy, so that you can build a very sustainable, successful, fulfilled entrepreneurial journey.
I love that.
When we look at emotional intelligence, but more specifically money EQ, there's a lot out there about money mindset, right? Like chant the affirmations and like do the things, and that's all great and well. But I like to bring things down into like the 3D world and get real on, what we're really looking at here. So the one side is what you're more familiar with, the money blocks, right? What you learned as programming growing up, which is going to determine all of your behaviors with money, right? How you spend, how you save, how you create, right? What you believe about how much you can create. And a lot of the times it's those stories that we like commonly hear about. It's, money is bad, money is greedy, you'll become a bad person. Or, my favorite is just be comfortable. My whole life up until like the last few years, I was always just comfortable. Even if I got an extra bonus, I'd spend it away because my parents said, just be comfortable. Don't ever have too much. It's very greedy to have too much. So that's actually the way that I live my life. And you'll notice like you might feel like guilt and shame if you like, spend on your credit card and you're like, why do I feel guilt and shame? I'm just buying some groceries, right? Or you feel fine buying a pair of pants, but you like really hate buying toilet paper. Like, why is that, right? So these are the money stories that are, really determining your behavior around money. And again, your emotional states and your behavior are very tightly connected to your beliefs. On the other side of things, right? And so we'll talk about that in just a moment. The second side is the upper limit blocks, right? Why we do not create more money. What is the upper glass ceiling of what we can create? And so that's number one. Going to be self-worth is the biggest one. This ties into imposter syndrome. This ties into worthiness. This is the biggest one that I see with many of my clients, especially if they didn't come from a lot. And they're kind of like, I to this, like, I didn't have a lot, or, I was from a very abusive family, or I was in a shelter, like me, like little old me, right? And they have literally $1 million contracts on their table that they don't want to sign because they're like, that can't be for me. I can't do that. What if I fail, and what if I lose it all? And then I'll be back to where I started. So it's better just to not. Right. It's these like really pesky mindset loops, and it's literally the next level of success waiting there in their inbox, and they just can't move forward. Right. It can get really pesky like that. The other thing we want to look at is sacrifice, right? Success can be really expensive, right? Especially if you are feeling really isolated, if you're feeling your relationships are on the fritz. There's so much pressure and responsibility. You're already burnt out, like you're already at maximum capacity. How could you possibly push to more? Because logically, if there's more success, there's going to be more of that, right? The sacrifice is too big. And the last one is threat safety, right? Again, tying into like isolation. If you have more, maybe there'll be judgment from friends and family. Maybe there'll be, people will no longer resonate with you. What if you have to leave clients behind because you're raising your prices? You have to restructure and fire people. Like there's all kinds of reasons. And, that's hitting core wounds around abandonment and, being, nobody wants that, right? That doesn't make us feel safe. It like literally threatens baseline safety. And again, your subconscious, 95% of your brain, the number one job is to keep you safe, right? So there will be reasons where essentially the perceived consequence of getting what you want, right? This is the upper limit block, is actually greater than the perceived potential benefit. So you will not move forward, right? Safety, sacrifice, and self-worth. And so, when we look at removing the obstacles, the roadblocks, or reprogramming and rewiring the core money stories, both of these, a part of you is not aligned with the next level of success. A part of you doesn't actually want it, even though consciously the 5% of your mind is like, I really want it. It's all that I want. What am I doing all of this for? Right? There's a bigger part of you that is not wanting it. So again, that's where the self-sabotaging behaviors typically come in, where you procrastinate, you do a lot of analysis paralysis, you go into anxiety spirals. And again, the scarcity will then loop into the risk aversion, right? Because deep down, you do fear that, will you be able to produce it again? Will you be able to sustain it? And what if it does run out? Then, you're like, I kind of want to like conserve what I have now, and are afraid to like, then make a next level investment, do a next level expansion. And sometimes these decisions are hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, right? So, of course, again, the bigger the numbers get, the more pressure and responsibility you put on yourself. So when we can move into neutrality, we can think with the most amount of clarity, right? The EQ. Okay, if, emotions aside, what is actually the best decision for my business? And I'm sure you see this a lot with your clients investing in you as well. What is actually the right decision for your business, money aside, right? Because we build up all of this fear and shame and guilt, right? And about what money will mean about us if we have a little or a lot, right? And it's like, well, money is just a tool and a resource that we can utilize to generate more wealth, but we need to be able to think clearly with it, have a great relationship with it so that we can actually leverage it.
Yeah, you just dropped. I really encourage anyone who's struggling in the money space to like listen to what you just said a couple of times, because you just dropped a lot of information in a really short space of time. And I particularly loved how succinctly you shared there around sacrifice and self-esteem. I think you said, and safety.
Self-worth, yeah.
Self-worth, yeah. And I think that really does play into it. But I guess I wanted to ask, maybe this is not something you can answer, I'm not sure, but I guess a lot of my audience, because they're growth getters, they've done the work, they do the work. And often, I don't know if you can, see this in your clients. I'm sure you can, because you're working with high performers. It's almost like the more we know what's wrong, we know, why we're doing it. And then we get caught in a loop where we don't quite ascend it. That happens a lot for people who don't really dive in and get to the root of it. And I'm curious what you might say to someone who is having the experience of money is just always a problem. Like they might get some and then they lose it. Like they're never really getting off that baseline enough. Like it's a constant stress in their system. And whether they've had money in the past or not, I don't know. But and so whether it's like, I don't know if I want it. You said there's a part of them, and I think that's the key thing. There's a part of them that wants to stay in that cycle of suffering around money more than they want to step into the abundance, even though they would argue, I'm sure, till they're blue in the face that no, they want the abundance. So the question is this: to help them start to really unpack what that thing is underneath, what are the key questions? So to help them go, okay, what is it that I apparently want more of? Or what is it that I'm staying loyal to? Or what is it that I'm deathly afraid will kill me? Like what would be, I don't know, are there any questions that if someone could sit with themselves, they might get a little aha and go, okay, I need to come see Kyra, or wow, this is new information for me?
The best question to ask yourself is, what is the consequence of getting the next level, right? Whatever your next level is, it'll be very individual to you, and just make a list. It'll be very, very clear, right? Reasons why there will be a consequence, and there always is a consequence perceived. It's not a real consequence. It's something that we've created in our minds that we are like, well, that's a consequence, and the consequence is too big, right? Even though logically you want more. This is the best question to ask yourself time and time again. It will become very obvious. And
sorry, just for clarity, do you mean a consequence that feels like a negative consequence? Because some people would go, no, there's only good things. It would be amazing. I'd have all the money. I'd buy other things. But you're kind of saying, like, what's the negative thing that could come about from me getting what I say I want? Because they maybe haven't thought about that. Yeah, gotcha.
Right. So we have to get really clear with, what are the possible, and you can stretch if you don't feel that it's that connected, but there is always a perceived consequence, right? We like to call it, another way to think about it is there's actually a benefit, what is the benefit of staying where you are?
Yeah.
Right. That's a big one. There's a secondary gain. Right? There's a reason why you want it's comfortable, right? Even with people who want more, sometimes you've worked so hard to get to where you want, like you don't really want to go through that again. Like it was so much hard work and struggle and rejection and failure. And that's just part of the journey. It's, again, if we can regulate rejection and regulate failure and understand like it doesn't actually mean anything about your ability to create success. It just you're getting closer to the success by getting more no's and rejections and, finding out more data that is actually going to be very useful to you. But that's, those two questions are probably really, really important to take a look at.
It's amazing. Yeah. And I think that's really valuable because sometimes we can hear all these things and it can just be washing over us. But I really encourage you to do what Kyra's just said. And if you're having an experience of money, whether it's a ceiling, whether it's always like hanging down at that baseline, whether it's just stressing about it, but you have plenty, is, ask yourself, what's the benefit to this situation, and or what's the negative consequence of getting what I think what I'm saying I want? And just like keep going until you hit something and you're like, ooh, there's something there. Yeah. So Kyra, I mean, we could talk, I think, forever about all the things.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh, I just could listen to you. And my system is like, yeah, tell them, yeah. But I'm curious. I'm going to give you some rapid fire questions now as we start to wrap up. And so what would be the number one book that you would recommend for someone to really like get a handle on either high performance or overcoming the bottlenecks of their mind, or like what's your and you can pick more than one if you want.
Okay, I got to give two. Number one would definitely be The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. He talks a lot about upper limit blocks. And number two would be The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler. He is a high performance coach, very famous, amazing. So those two books are definite reads.
Okay, the second one is new to me, so I'm excited. That's awesome. And then what would be your number one tip for anyone listening who wants to just activate more energy? So they're flat today. They're feeling flat right now and they're like, far out, where's my energy at? Like, what's your go-to for more energy?
So actually, I'm going to share this in the show notes, but I use something called the learning state. I'm sure you may have learned this as well through NLP. But if you're ever in a negative state, anxiety, anything like that, or just need to refocus, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which then allows you to, again, kind of find some calm, focus, drop into neutrality, drop into your body. We often think energy is the high vibe, the high energy, the confidence go-getter, but often it's just so that we can just get in our bodies, feel calm and clear. And that's when we're going to have the highest propensity for whatever it is that we need to do for ourselves, right? And again, like be present, because when we are most present, it's also the only moment we have to do anything. That is when you're going to have the greatest level of execution and activation for yourself.
So the learning state, for someone who's new to that phrase, what does that look like? Does that look like meditation? Like what are they doing?
Yeah, it's honestly, I think it's like a 2 to 3 minute short video that I share, and you can just go ahead and use it. And it's just some breathing, some eye movements, and focus. It literally takes a couple minutes to activate, and the video itself, it's a very short training, and you can utilize that at any time. So that'll be available for anyone listening too.
We'll link to that, and everyone should go get it and learn it and use it. So then what is, and maybe it's the same, what would be the number one go-to to feel empowered? So to really feel like, okay, I got this. I'm feeling super, the beliefs are dropping in, like, yeah, I can move forward. The opposite of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the biggest thing for me, it's kind of, what we talked about earlier. Mindset can be so simple, but it's not easy. And it's this idea of, you're either in a victim mindset of I don't have control, or in empowerment, right? And this is, again, a practice. This is not something that happens overnight, but when you can just focus in on, okay, maybe it's a chart, and now I can do this very easily without writing anything down, but I used to write down what's not in my control and what's in my control. Like, what is it that I can control? The only thing I can control is my mindset and my emotions, so that I can create an action. And again, actions are behaviors that create a result in your real world. So when you can get clear on, okay, so this I can't control, so I'm not going to worry about that. There's nothing to worry about. There's always going to be something in your world, fear, something going sideways, a global pandemic, right? Like, we cannot control those things. All right, let me look at what I can control, and let me go ahead and choose one of these to then take action on. Because again, when we can get clear and make things very micro and start moving forward, then we can build a momentum. And again, when we can move forward, our brain is like dopamine, and we start to feel better, and we start to feel more confident and motivated, right? So I would say, what is in my control? And again, break it down, make it micro, and then make it small, so that we can take one action forward, and then you'll move on to the next. And really, you can only do one thing at a time. So that usually always shifts me back into empowerment, because I am in control and I have choice over, and full responsibility for what I can create right now.
That's awesome. That's a really great, tangible answer. Thank you. And then the last question is around expression. And I think particularly, I want to ask this question slightly differently to how I normally do, because I know that you really work and in the coaching space as well, but any entrepreneur or any thought leader, or even any person who wants to be in their fullest expression on the planet, there is an element, particularly nowadays with the ways in which the channels work, social media, etc., around visibility. And expressing your thoughts and being seen, and being compared or comparing yourself. So I'm going to expand the question. It doesn't have to be quite so rapid fire, but I would really love you to tap into, because this is something I've come up against at the age I'm at, not growing up with social media, coming to it late, kind of feeling like it's a random weird thing, because I did years and years of what we'd call traditional bricks and mortar business. Like, I understood marketing there. I had no problem selling there. And then coming into the social media space, it just felt foreign, and there was an element of expression that felt really blocked for me around visibility. And so for someone who maybe is really struggling with letting themselves be seen, or really expressing themselves with full liberation, have you got any tips about that, or any advice, or just things that they could explore and unpack for themselves, perhaps? Because I think that's a big one for many.
Definitely. I mean, visibility is always tough, because we're all typically, not always, some people get, really conscious parents, repressed in some way. We were molded in a certain way. Limitations were placed on us by our parents, expectations, society's expectations. And so, a lot of the times, if we haven't done the work to unravel them, we live in them. And, I would say one of the biggest things is, really looking at, of course, the fear of rejection, right? If you were to show that weird side of you, or if you were to show something that you didn't feel fully confident on, or felt that you had the experience, I feel, hear it all the time, I don't have the experience, or I'm not at that level yet. You know, when we can start to look at, okay, so like, what if I do get rejected, right? What if, we go through the what ifs, right? What if, it flops, right? Like, visiting the scary monster in the closet. Okay. We just got to look at it. Okay. If it flops, okay, I try again, or maybe I'll like lick my wounds for a bit and then come back. Or, if I get rejected, okay, it's going to feel kind of bad, but like, I didn't die. Like I woke up the next day, I was totally fine. Right. So when we can kind of start to like, again, neutralize the big scary monsters, then we can start to look at, okay, so like it's not so bad. And like, what if it is great? Like, what if the things I do say is exactly what somebody's waiting for me to hear, and like playing the other side of what ifs, right? Because our brains are dialed to Armageddon mind. What if it goes wrong? What if it doesn't work? All of the ways that we're trying to keep ourselves safe. But like, what if it does go right? And what if it is amazing? And what if somebody reaches out because of the one thing that you said, right? Like, there's so many ways. And so that's like, one tangible way I would look at it. The other thing too is, again, if it's something that's uncomfortable, discomfort is not the same thing as inability. You absolutely can do this, right? And I would say, again, micro steps. So whether that is a quick story and it's a photo, get it in, right? But again, it's like working a muscle. It's going to feel weird. It's going to feel uncomfortable. And, really look at like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Okay, nobody saw it for 24 hours or nobody responded. Does that actually mean something about you being able to create success? No, it's just a story that, someone didn't respond to. I have people all the time not respond to my stories and then come out of nowhere and then sign on for 6 months to a year, so like it doesn't mean anything. But when we can get back to, the parts, right, that we talked about full circle, that we rejected and shamed and, that we feel embarrassed about, it's really looking at that and number one, look at the scary monster, but number two, how can we start to make peace with that, knowing that like, we're all a little bit weird and we're all a little bit, learning the things and we're all doing something uncomfortable. So we're actually all in the same boat, right? Like someone else is experiencing this too, just in a slightly different way, or maybe the same, or maybe on a higher level, right? And so it's just starting to open the mind. There's no, magic secret thing that can happen and, make this instantaneously better overnight, but it's getting the practice of getting our mindsets to think differently about ourselves, differently about the task at hand, and making small micro steps that are going to, again, plug in confidence for you, because you just got to get those reps in.
So I'm going to surmise it just because it cements my learning, but I think it also helps the listener. What I heard you say there around visibility and showing up was, first of all, it's okay to go to worst case scenario thinking, like let your brain say that stuff and then go, and what? I'm still not dead, so we can handle it. Two, I heard you say, let it also open up the possibility box of like, and what if it went okay? What could that look like? Because maybe even there's a ceiling there, right? Like maybe there's almost a block around what could happen if it went well. And then third was, chunk it down so that it feels safe to move forward. And then most of all, work that muscle, create that momentum, and gather the evidence and let that grow. And then I'm also thinking, as you were speaking there, I feel like even for a lot of coaches or business people in that public eye, perhaps it's even just something around really attaching more to like being, I guess, or well, let me just say it more simply, is like letting go of any attachment to outcome. Like if I want to just be about this, if I want to just be the vessel or the person who's so committed to this, then maybe I just do the do and I don't attach to outcome, but I'm committed to doing the do. And then of course, as you said, if you show up and people are not responding to stories and they're not responding to stories, doesn't mean, especially in this day and age, social media, like even getting a like these days, people can't be bothered. They're consuming, but they just keep going past. So yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot there for people. So thank you so much about that.
Thank you. And just to your point too, it's like the bigger work underneath that, right, is just really the separation of our identity from money and success. Like those things do not define you. They do not, what currently is happening is not an indication of what will happen. We just have to really separate ourselves from that. And it's going to create a whole new level of freedom and a level of success, because then you are able to focus on like the daily habits, the daily things that you need to be doing to then generate that level of success. So I love it.
I love it. And so, Kyra, if, I like to say, and it sounds always scary and it's never happened, but if the entire podcast got deleted and all people got to hear from you, and it maybe is a little earwig that they get to hear in their ear, or maybe it's a billboard that they get to see, or it's a message in a bottle, like if you could distill a sentence or two sentences down for anyone out there who, wants to perform better and wants to, develop this mindset currency and have more of like what would you have them know? What's the thing that you're like, guys, I've learned this is important?
Oh, there's so many things. Okay, so some of the most important things is that, number one, nothing is a big deal. Okay, when we can really, again, do the deeper work, the subconscious work, the emotional regulation, understanding like failure and rejection are completely normal, right? It's not this big, scary thing. That would be one of the big things. And then the second thing would be, nothing has meaning until you assign it. So, you can choose a different story. You can choose a different mental state for you to then, have more in your life, a happier life, whether that's success or in love or just personal fulfillment. And the last thing is that like everything is a choice. You have all the power in the world to change anything you want in your life, but you have to believe that you can, right? And again, always comes back to our belief systems. Okay, that's it.
Okay. You did great. That was awesome. Yeah. And I agree with all of those 3 points. Yeah. We have the power. And I think that's the key thing. We just don't realize. And we get caught in the stories, and that's where we have our power just seep out. Yeah. Beautiful. Kyra, thank you so much for your time today. This was just jam-packed. I will be hand delivering this podcast to all of the coaches I've ever trained. I'll be like, you listen to this, you take notes from this, you do this thing. Yeah. Because it's such and like I said at the top of it, it's not even just for entrepreneurs, but that's just I feel like that's a petri dish of self-esteem. And, because you are the creator, you're at the steering wheel of all of those results, and the pressure is so real, etc. But any high performer, any high level manager, any person leading in any space, this is all relevant information. And you've just shared so much wisdom. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for I love the clarity with which you speak. And the tangibility. As someone who really believes in tangible and bringing these esoteric concepts into the real world, it's been such a treat to speak to a guest who also just seems to be really focused on that. So thank you. As an interviewer, that was really delightful. I loved it, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again and have you back on for a whole other topic that we can dive into. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This is amazing.